Number 3, Kevin Hague.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker.
Tēnā koe.
My question is to the Minister of Health and asks, what advice, if any, has he sought or received on threats to public health in New Zealand?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker.
Tēnā koe.
I have received a wide range of advice on threats to public health in New Zealand. These include the Greens' suggestion that health officials should consider homeopathy to treat the deadly Ebola virus.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Kevin Hague.
Who will pay the extra cost of medicines arising out of the TPPA, as the Prime Minister conceded yesterday? Will it be patients, other health services or taxpayers?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, I think the Prime Minister covered this very extensively in the last question. The fact is the public won't pay any more for their medicines. The prescription charge remains the same. And the key to all this is the TPP is going to mean we've got a wealthier, a stronger economy, which means actually we can afford a better health system all the time. There might be a slight increase in patent extensions, but as the PM has said, the government will pay for that. But in the end, the benefits of this deal vastly outweigh any details like that.
Supplementary question, Kevin Hague.
So then, what advice has he given the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance about the probable extra cost of medicines if the TPPA was signed as currently drafted?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
The point is, no one, or you don't know what's in the TPP at the moment, and the fact is, we don't know exactly what might happen in terms of patent extension because it hasn't been signed. That's the key point.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Has the Minister seen any reports on the amount of funding going into health in Budget 2015? And does he think that we would, as a country, have more money or less money to put into health if we were no longer in a free trade agreement with Australia, China and many other countries?
That's a great question, Prime Minister.
Order. The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
I've seen, well, it's more than a report, it's a fact that we've got a record amount going into health, 15.9 billion. 400 million went in at the budget, and actually if we didn't have FTAs with all those countries the PM mentioned, we'd be far weaker as an economy and we wouldn't be able to afford the first-class health system that we have today.
I apologise to the Minister. Point of order, Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker, is it now in order to ask the Minister of Health questions about the implications of trade agreements?
Order. Order. Can I suggest the member have a good look at the question? The question also said, has the Minister seen any reports about more investment into health? That was the start of the question, and that is certainly in order to ask the Minister of Health. Supplementary question, Kevin Hague.
Well, given the Minister's confidence, will he now guarantee that he will not raid the rest of the health budget to pay for the extra costs that Pharmac would incur as a result of signing the TPPA?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, it's not a case of raiding the health budget. We've put an average of $500 million of new money into the health budget every year. It's at record levels, but more importantly than ever, we're delivering better services than ever. So the member has nothing to worry about.
Supplementary question, Kevin Hague.
So what does he say to New Zealanders who won't have access to the latest cutting-edge medicines because their cost has risen beyond Pharmac's reach? Let them eat milk powder?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman. Order. I'll hear from the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, I'd observe that the Minister answering the question is giving the other side a bit of a whipping, but a question like that cannot be a question about something. A minister cannot be responsible for something that has not happened.
Oh, order. Order. No, the Speaker's rulings are quite clear on this. A hypothetical question can be asked. It gives the Minister very wide range in answering the question as he'll have on this occasion. The question was, what will he say to New Zealanders, etc., when drugs potentially cost more? Very hypothetical question, but I'm certainly not ruling it out of order. The Honourable Dr. Jonathan
What I
Coleman.
would say is that we spend $800 million through Pharmac each year. We're providing more medicines than ever before. If the Greens were in power, don't forget their co-leader, Materia Ture, didn't even realise we had an FTA with Australia. So, I mean, on trade, they have zero credibility.
Order, 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 order. This is a point of order and it will be heard in silence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is it now in order for members raising points of order to give a commentary on how they think question time is going before raising their point of order, as the Leader of the House did in his point of order just
Order. Now, the member's now getting to the stage when he's starting to trifle with the chair with his points of order. Any member can raise one. That was a hypothetical question. Mr Brownlee took the opportunity to question whether it was an order. I ruled that it was an order. It's since been answered. Supplementary? Is this a supplementary question?
Order,
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, the issue that I have with Mr Brownlee's point of order was that it was introduced with a statement that was designed to create disorder in the House. When members of the opposition benches have done similar things, you've threatened to throw them out. Why didn't you do that to Mr Brownlee?
Because I didn't perceive for 1 minute that it was raised in an effort to make disorder. Further supplementary? Order! Order! I just want to give the member a very forewarning after yesterday. He's freely able to raise a point of order. But if it is anyway attempting to litigate what we've already ruled on, then I pre-warn the member I will be dealing with it very, very severely. Supplementary question, Kevin Hague.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can the Minister guarantee that if New Zealand legislates or adopts policy to improve public health, we will not be subject to costly investor-state dispute settlement procedures?
Mr Speaker,
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
if you look at every trade agreement we've ever had, ISDS has been part of that, and so have safeguards. It's never caused us a problem in the past, and that's exactly central to TPP.
Supplementary question, Kevin Hague.
Well, if the government is not concerned about the chilling effect of investor-state dispute settlement on regulation to protect public health, will he now immediately proceed to pass the plain packaging bill through its remaining stages, a bill which his government placed on ice because it was afraid of precisely such action
Order.
from tobacco
This is
companies?
becoming a very long question. The essence of it can be answered. The Honourable Dr Johnson. Insofar as there's ministerial responsibility.
Sure, what I am really concerned about is the chilling effect of the Green Party's nonsense on New Zealand's long-term economic prospects.
Order. Point. Order. Point of order.
Point of order. It was a pretty straight question about a piece of legislation for which this minister has responsibility. There was no political sting in it.
Order. Order. No, I don't need any assistance. I will hear on this occasion.
I don't actually have responsibility for that legislation. Sorry, the member has his facts wrong. That is actually Minister Lotoina's delegation.
And that could have been the way the minute. Order. 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 Mr Farfoy, I'm on my feet ruling on a point of order. The minister could well have chosen to answer it that way. That might well have been more helpful. But the problem with the question was it was a very long question. It was also loaded with the use of the word chilling. If the member could only ask short, sharp supplementaries, then I can assist a member to get an answer addressing that question. Question number 4, Dr Jan Yang.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Associate Minister